to the conceptual practices of the 60s and the 70s, but different from them, with the kind of very precious for me collaboration with a very good friend of mine called David Rao, who is a computer scientist. We've actually created a small computer program which samples manually categorized characteristics that I made on base of my work. So basically I became kind of an algorithm, but I did the work manually. And in data science you have these terms of like categorized, uncategorized data. So in a very subjective way I did that with my own work, and we sampled that and created the instruction works. And there's also sound in that show, and I'm very happy that we have the chance to play a few of those pieces here. Interesting about these pieces, they're actually they are generative works, different from the instructions I'm presenting there, for which there's no instruments or any tools used to be created, but we've actually translated the text of the instructions into sound. And the analogy that I was also thinking about these works is, you know how we sometimes try to tell each other a movie, and we're like, oh, let me tell you about this movie, and then you try to tell the story in your own way, like storytelling. And of course, if you would ever manage to do that, cinema perhaps would cease to exist, because then you would take over that function. But we can't really, right? So we choose what to speak about or what to select. And in that similar way, I think translating language into sound, in fact, what we did, I'm super fascinated with the result. Of course, I've selected some of those pieces. Are they music? I don't know. What is the difference between music and sound and noise? I'm not precisely sure. But I do like the aesthetic of that sound very much. It's quite broken, ambient-y, experimental, but also in fact sounds very atmospheric, and I think that's one of the reasons I come back to sound for my installations very often.
It's interesting that I believe only a contemporary artist that is working so much with mixed media as yourself can put together in one sentence aesthetics and music, because normally aesthetics is something we contribute to the visual side of things, but I do believe that music has a visual side pretty much strong, and it can be also associated with aesthetics. So we started like with your art, quite maybe just straight to the point. But for me, it's very interesting to trace back in your past, let's say, because just as any musical genre, let's say, or any development of music as a art form, each artist also has his own like let's say etaps or own like stages of life and development. So I am gonna go back with a little bit of biographical and more personal stuff. I like to do that, but also because most of my guests, I really do know them in a way or another. So we try to date back our friendship, the start of our friendship, and we agreed on 2010.
Softly agree on 2010. Yeah, we
Yes,
shake hands.
let's say it's 2010/11, but I mean, time was time. So back in the day, I remember you studied when I met you. You studied photography in Natvis, which is a Bulgarian institution like teaching arts, mostly performative arts, though. So this is also interesting. I don't know if it's a special twist to learning photography in an academy which normally teaches performative arts. I believe there is a twist to that because, okay, I've studied photography in a more traditional, let's say, more like fashionally oriented way. So attached more to the still life, to the still image, and then probably you have a connection with the image in motion more. Would you say that's
to your question,
somehow?
actually, I just wanted to use what you said to then refer back to what I perceived the kind of the beginning of my practice, but I would still answer. Well, the main focus was actually coming more through cinema, because in the National Film Academy, in which I was studying photography in Bulgaria, in fact, It's quite well known for acting and performing arts, and I was in the cinema department, so all the photography was actually related to cinema. And the reason I decided to continue my what happened to be actually quite a long studying practice was that I never called myself a photographer when I was doing that. But why it then became important for my practice later is that my sort of entry to the arts was not through, say, the practice of drawing or creating an image with your hand, but it was rather through observation. And I think this is quite influential for then the way I was perceiving an image as the kind of smallest unit that the elaborate installation that I created later happened to be. And in fact, once I left that school, I never made photography, with one exception, the documentation of my work actually. And more than this is also quite an important aspect of the show I have now in Sofia, which name is Colorless. Wait. What's the name of my show? No. Colorless Green Ideas Sleep Furiously, it's called the show. But I was talking about documentation, so more than becoming the document of the existence of the work and something that we used to share on social media, it also it's the image that remains after the work is done. And I was doing it quite persistently for the last almost 10 years, next year actually 10 years. And so that was also the reason for me to try to reapproach it then and see what I can do with it, or is it important to think of it as kind of having a certain autonomy. But that's with photography. Actually, I perceived the beginning of my practice performative work I did nearly 10 years ago, a reenactment of which I'm doing tomorrow at Toplo Centrala at 7 o'clock.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Time for some
to invite everybody.
Time for some invitation. But this was
tell us more about that, because it's also very interesting, or at least let's say the title is definitely attractive for me now, because I'm in a way where, or let's say in a way I'm affected for this discourse by everyone is the feminist cyber feminism.
So the name of the event is Technofem, cyber feminist practices in Bulgaria, cyber feminism in Bulgaria, and it's a project initiated by Borjana Rosa, who's a Bulgarian artist based in New York. Another person who would participate is Albena Bava, who's also a Bulgarian artist, Bulgaria-based, who's also quite engaged with digital media, digital technologies, and the performances and a consequent conversation later will be moderated by Snezhana Krsteva, who's a curator, independent curator. And the project started with the initiation of Borjana to us to write a statement or some sort of reflection on cyberfeminism and how we relate to it, because we more or less come from 3 different generations. And so we did that, and I was quite happy for that task, because the essay, I suppose, or the statement that I wrote was quite a transformative text for me. In the beginning, I called it Thoughts and Notes on Cyberfeminism, and by the end of writing it, I renamed it on Coming Out as a Feminist, Thoughts and Notes on Cyberfeminism. And actually in that text, I'm going also through something that you started talking about, in fact, this transitional nature of the practice, and how, say, in my early 20s, I don't think it was that important for me, neither where I was coming from, nor the sort of socio-political aspect of me being a woman. And this was not a coincidence, but it was rather a choice based on some observations that I had, that very often a work that is labeled as feminist, we are ending up being talking about it through the concept of feminism rather than the subject which is exploring. And so it was this active position in which I was insisting on being called an artist and not a female artist, as a way to sort of acknowledge the work that is already done by 3 generations of feminism that we know and happen, and have some things to say. So the event will be quite exciting and interesting, even for me as a starting point, because we're on one side like presenting each of us is presenting a work that is going to be followed up by the discussion, but also I think it's quite an important work from a historical perspective of trying to contextualize a term that is pretty much it's quite widespread, and it has ramification not only in the West but in many different localities, and it's being acknowledged. So that's about tomorrow's event.
So can you just repeat once again the location and the time, so everybody's invited?
Toblo Centrala, 7 o'clock, and the event is going to be running for about 2 hours, I suppose.
And it's a free entry event.
It's a free entry event, okay. Yes.
So I'll be there, because actually my questions regarding cyberfeminism and how is it really working to protect us feminists and female individuals in this cyber age, because we're undergoing a lot of changes, and especially like recently I read about this like crazy AI undress bots and things that are happening actually to some of my friends in Serbia. So like a friend of mine got blackmailed by her ex, receiving like hundreds of photos in Telegram groups where she was participating, naked photos of her, but actually it was not her, and so generated pornography with her image, and a lot of other discourses, of course, we can attach to the cyber existence and feminism together. So tomorrow it's a very interesting debate. I urge everyone to come and join us. And also now let's go back to, let's say, what brought us here in the first place. Of course, is music, because also I'm hearing the last 5 minutes of this beautiful tune that you presented me with to start like as a background of our conversation. So we started talking about movies, about cinema, and the connection with sound and image, of course. So would you introduce the Utopia 2041 track? Tell us more about it.
Yeah, sure. So this piece, Utopia 2041, I made during my residency in Cairo in the end of last year. And even though I don't really repeat myself in my practice, so that's a rather kind of exhausting way to kind of approach life, this reinvention of worlds every time. There's sometimes like themes or certain approaches that keep coming back, and for a couple of years I was interested in like introducing sort of a critical perspective towards certain subjects, like the show I did last year in Sofia City Art Gallery with the movies of Binka Železkova, or in this particular case I was busying myself with like non-Western science fiction during my residency in Egypt. But I was presenting a work, so an installation work that has no moving image within it, but I was presenting it as a film. And I was doing that by adopting as art forms format that are intrinsic to cinemas, so to say. So I would do like images that function as posters, or collaborate with musicians to do soundtracks or alternative soundtracks of existing movies, storyboards or props. And for this particular one, this was actually a follow-up of another residency I did in Brussels, which was called Halakat. And from Arabic it means circles or connecting points. And so the kind of main framework there was studying the cultural links between Europe and the Arab world. And when I started that, I actually had to acknowledge my very little knowledge of what the Arab world constitutes, and what are we talking about when we say this cultural connection constitutes. So I started from very far away, like mythology, older history, and found like really amazing stories. But a kind of something that stayed on the back of my mind is that the Western narratives tends to oversee history, and we give very little account or very little credit to a lot of inventions that actually come from the locality of the Arab world, as big as it is. So my what I wanted to do with my installations is, in this rather speculative ways, to bring back that reference to the work. So with the first piece, I created this like everything alternative to DUNE, so an alternative film score, a prop that was also kind of claiming to be infiltrated in the movie and so on. And so for the second part of the residency, we were invited to basically show that work there. But I've decided to continue my research and make a new piece. And this to the moment in which this was in 2023, I found a little bit before going there, I found a novel called Utopia, which was by Ahmed Tawfi, was the author, who wrote this dystopian novels and published it in 2008, but the action was set in 2023. So I found that quite exciting as a way to revisit the narrative of this back then futuristic novel, present day reality, and see if what he envisioned actually happened in the present, how it happened, and basically continue his narrative. And so the narrative of the installation I was presenting had this different time cues, like time sets. I actually don't remember the particular years, but it was starting the present day reality, so 2023, and then 2037, 2039, and then the 2041 was the last moment. And so when I was working with the musician who I met there, it was actually quite a beautiful collaboration. I started a practice I called basically like writing scripts for sonic films. So it was not only like how do you talk about sound? Like that's a very big question. How do you describe sounds? And I don't mean this very technical aspects of like talking about kicks and bass, which is also can be a way, of course, but also how do you talk about sound through the feeling or the kind of affection it's producing. So I'll write this script in which I use some kind of analogies. So Cairo is also known as the honking capital of the world. It's very noisy. People are communicating through the honking. It's actually can be intimidating, can be also a bit funny. They're telling each other, they're swearing, telling each other that they love each other, saying thank you through the way they're honking. And so,
how would you say "I love you" in a
I don't remember. It
honky
was based on the Morse code, actually. I mean, very fascinating.
Short and long.
Short and long, like, and you hear that as this overlaying layers of sounds. And so when I was writing the script for the sound piece, we used recording of the honking, but I'll tell them, Abdo, the musician I met there, imagine. I use the analogy of the falling star. We know that it's a bit cheesy, but okay, I'm gonna say it. So we know that when we see a falling star, we've heard it. We see the light of the star that is already dead. So I told him, imagine we're in 2041 and we hear the sound of the honking cars, but it's already in the past. They don't exist anymore. So translate the sound in such a way. And of course, like I don't know what the outcome would be, but precisely that dialogue and of course certain level of trust and a certain level of kind of checking up before and kind of aligning a certain maybe expectation from the sound. It's really the beauty of it, because I used to make sound myself for a little bit back in the days. And
what kind of sound? Like
no.
Like I made sound.
It was interesting actually that I did not try to emulate in any way the sound I was into or I was listening to. It was a very emotional experience. It was more of I was not so skilled, so I would just sit in Ableton and like use different samples and distort some voice recordings and make some drums, and then 7 hours later there was some kind of track, and it was great.
Yeah, but I mean, what's the definition of skilled or technically skilled? Actually,
No,
now there is a big departure. I believe what's happening, just to add my input to that, because you spoke first of music, then you said what's music and what's noise, and now you're speaking of sound. So there you go. It's like one of those situations where language is really not helping us, because we as humans have created so many different words for things which actually have no boundary within words. So making sounds and making noise or making music and also associating it to skills, I believe it's also very Western kind of tradition of judging the quality of your art or what you're producing. Because, as you said, music is creating emotions. How do you explain this emotion? And Ableton is not the judge of that.
I mentioned the level of skill for that moment back in time because I was not in control. That's what I meant. I could not necessarily produce the sound I want to, which I think for like a serious producer, perhaps.
Well, if we talked to Sun Ra, maybe he would disagree. Like a lot of like great and I think like really great musicians didn't want to be in control, but maybe that's first you need to reach the control phase and then go back. I really like what you created here, like I mean in the Utopia with the collaboration, of course, but also I'm really interested to hear the other.
I would say, yeah, I would really want to give the credit to Abdo because he composed the sound, in fact. But as I mentioned already, he used this written text, which was the script for Sonic. I call it script for Sonic film, which is a quite detailed description of how the sound evolves. I mean, there's a lot of overlap with what we know from film music. So there's a lot of Foley sounds. There's a lot of atmosphere. There's also a certain rhythm. It's also divided on 4 parts, which also correspond to the 4 timelines in the installation. And we had a few feedback sessions, which are also quite fascinating. Or like, I listen, and I know that it does matter if I listen to it at 2 at night or in the morning on kind of fresh ears and fresh mind. But you listen and then you react to something and give feedback, as in there's a particular way for the sound to evolve, but there's no such thing. Like everything, it's based on emotion and subjectivity, I feel.
So I suggest we stay with the music for a couple of minutes and take a break to also greet our friends who arrived here, and they're just like, you don't see them, but you might hear them banging the door. and then we can continue with the second, let's say, part of our talk, when I would be really interested more in knowing about the instructions and then the tracks that you've created for the current exhibition in Rosita. Also because it's something that we might see still. It's valid, but it's also bringing us to closer to the question of whether it's possible to create installations without sound, or can we exist in vacuum, as we were speaking before. So yeah, let's take a short break from talking and stay with us for the rest of the talk. Okay, so we are back. We're back here to continue our conversation, and we're actually already listening to um, out 3 or instruction number 3. I don't know, or just the sound coming from these instructions. So once again, for those who didn't listen to the first part, now we're going to discuss in depth the process behind creating the audio works for your current installation in a Rosita gallery. And as you mentioned previously, you've created a set of sonic instructions. So then the sounds and the soundscapes that we're gonna listen come through these instructions. But how does it work? Is it some sort of algorithm that you
So, going back to the installation work, the process of creating the instructions was based on manual categorizing of images. And so I looked through all the photographs that constitute my archive, which are like hundreds and hundreds of photographs, and I decided to create a set of characteristics. The largest one was object, and so that's actually quite a peculiar list. In art, like a lot is based on context, ideas, or strength of ideas is based on taking something out of context or synthesizing different contexts, or that's how I see it. And in that sense, having that list with 130 objects that are either figurative objects or completely abstract, reading them to me really function in a quite poetic way. Another parameter was place, another was moment in time, another one was the political realm, there was do's and don'ts. And so I also wrote the so-called templates. So for example, template would be buy, object, 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 steal, object, 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 after doing a particular action. And so what did the computer program do is sampling these characteristics and creating the instructions. And I'm gonna read you one of those. Perhaps it wouldn't be corresponding to that sound because this is not data that is actually available to me. But one instruction reads the following: buy a human-sized paper envelopes, a curtain wooden screen showing a digital animation with an avatar welcoming you to a museum of non-human ethics, a big creature made out of melted plastics. Steal a 3 by 9 meters wallpaper collage of 3,500 AI-generated images. Borrow a 3D print of a tiny fluorescent staircase. Make a sculpture with them and donate it to a renowned museum. Your choice to live according to the ideas of art world, which contains element of both economic left and economic right. Make it a complex, multifaceted domain that cannot be neatly categorized into one economic ideology, will influence how others perceive what you did. Actually, it's very interesting to read it like that as a piece of writing, because only when you look at the syntax of the images, so I'm just gonna show you, sorry for the listeners, but we're gonna make sure that there's links to everything we talk about later. Looking at the syntax of the instructions, I've appropriated sort of like the visual language of the terminal, or the command prompt also known as, in order to emphasize what are precisely the tasks and what are precisely the objects that are constituted. And my kind of main claim with that was that there's nothing generative about this particular work. It's actually based on a lot of like manual synthesis, but you as a viewer become the generative algorithm, because through the function of your imagination you project you imagine these objects in your own way, you imagine precisely the action, and you place it according to your frame of reference or certain knowledge you have. And as another step, with David Arao, as I mentioned already, long time collaborator of mine, with whom I've been exploring everything machine learning, artificial intelligence, the political term as we know. Um, we've decided to translate those to sounds. And last year when I worked with him, I told him, you know, an algorithmic or a generative work, I see it sometimes as the ultimate conceptual work, where you have that equation of a source, so like a database, and then another one with which you're training it, and then something that you have as an outcome. But something that it's actually in a bit of a conflict with my own claim is that when we produce a work following that model, I still have a certain aesthetic need. So I still have that need to select or to say what works better than something else. And I think that's where we distinguish ourselves from, in fact, like algorithms or generative works in general, because similar to the story that I just told you, when we started with translating the sounds, the first step actually, we had a result that was not quite listenable, and we made a joke of being this torture artist who basically put the galleries into this situation of having to listen to something very noisy and in fact quite unlistenable for the coming months. But after a few other steps, which are related to the code David wrote, we came up with the pieces that I brought you tonight, which are to me quite interesting as piece of music, and something actually I haven't shared publicly so far. I'll be actually quite interested to release some of those and previous pieces of mine that are in fact being part of installation work, or that have been meant to be experienced in space as something that is more familiar as a music release, like digitally, or maybe making a tape even. I think that would be quite cool, because then once again I'll take them out of the context in which they're shown, and we can listen to them as sonic pieces.
I think that's a really great idea, also because for me personally, as someone who just listened to them earlier on, like separate pieces of art, I would say they work quite well. I would say it's a really nice ambient set of like nice 3-4 minute tracks I would love to listen to. And we just spoke about the people that you collaborate with, and you tend to emphasize on them quite a lot, obviously, because they're like a very important part of the process and also of your I think of your art practice. So how do you come along to find them? How do you find your collaborators? I mean, do you have some kind of approach? Do you search for certain artist or musician, or let's say programmer that you specifically know might tackle the task, or is it more like organic, related to just human interaction? That's interesting.
If I have to choose from one of those, it would be rather the latter. Like, it's always comes pretty naturally, though sometimes it is in fact a choice. And here I would mention one such example was a show I did in Plovdiv in the end of last year, in December, where, influenced by a current political situation, which was back then the beginning of the invasion of Palestine, I was quite actually feeling quite discouraged, even like asking myself if there's point of making art when the world is burning and there's no hope of like people who are actually in charge and have the power to stop the atrocity, to do something. And that's why, hence the name of the show, which is called Aftermath: No Humanity, No Art. And for that piece I also wanted to create like a set of pieces which are talking about different time frames. I hacked some clocks, like I made the clocks going backwards and things like that. There was certain like landscapes of what I saw as kind of a bit of apocalyptic future, but rather than future, was more seen as the present. And in that case, I asked good friend, common friend of ours, Etienne, to recommend me precisely a producer who is based in Plovdiv, because I do like to work contextually, and I think, or site specifically, I want to say, and this can happen on many different levels. Of course, working in space, you always react to the physical features of the space, even if you don't acknowledge it as a integral part of the work. But you can also work with site specificity in terms of history, as I did there. The space was a former atelier of a coppersmith, and in that sense I wanted to bring up a sound from a person that was from that locality, and that's how I found a girl called Fashion Gore. And interestingly, we never met, and we didn't even had a video call. We just communicated through via text, and she created quite an exciting, quite an intense piece, which I thought like fits the installation in particular. But I want to say one kind of important thing for me about the collaboration is that I do choose people to which I give the freedom to do their thing, that I don't want to be in control of, because in some other situations maybe you need more someone that has a particular material knowledge, or someone you would relate to as kind of a fabricator, say, but not really very rarely when it comes to sound, because there's such a big translation when we speak about image to sound or space to sound. There's so much, to me, like as I mentioned before, like emotion or emotionality involved in the process of creating sound, that I prefer this to be this kind of dialogue of misunderstanding, where I see misunderstanding in the most positive sense of you reading something through your perspective and translating it into sound. And so I do like to give space to my collaborators to do their thing, and we also get close to certain people for a reason. I believe in that, and it's quite exciting when something comes out as a result.
So would you like to share something more, as we already listening to the third track from the library you shared about these pieces? As you said earlier on, you shared with me that they start like gradually becoming more active, or let's say more hectic in terms of sound. Is it something that you also see happening in retrospective way? So is it temporarily related to your let's say development as an artist? Do you think as we go along with our life and with our careers and everything, the soundtrack of our life becomes more hectic, so like more intense, or how do you see it?
I see actually the development of certain tracks maybe through models that are quite familiar to us, like a bit as a storyline. So we're familiar with some more I suppose classical structures, where you have an intro or you're entering a narrative. Say there's pretty much every narrative is based on the transformation of the character. So that's also something that applies to sound. In fact, intensifies, and sometimes it ends exactly there, or it just slowly fades away. This did not answer your question at all. No, I don't think it becomes hectic.
That was my question.
I think it, if the soundscape of life becomes more hectic.
I'm joking.
I suppose we go through different periods, and I don't see that as a linear progression. Also within the practice, like some years are more intense, and like some larger projects are on the table, and in some others I also feel the need to retrieve back to some kind of more like personal private space to get my thoughts. Not that I have a lot of that space, but but I find it quite important for being able to reflect and continue from there and understand what it's that you need in that particular moment. I think things are rather complexifying with the progression of time, and that's not a bad thing. That's actually quite a feminist or feminist sensibility perspective of the kind of kind of being pro complexity versus simplifying the nature of things, I guess.
I think sometimes the most simple is the most complex. Also, coming from my own practice as a mother, human being, and I don't know my life so far. But that's also another way of reading things. And I would really like to know more about whether you have some, let's say, some precise inspirations in terms of artists that work with sound and they kind of use the same let's say methodology or instruments as yourself. So like let's say Chris Corda, or like there's some giant composers like in recent years that actually work a lot with programming, with speculative, let's say, algorithms, with programmed music, and they create like lots of tools and instruments for, let's say, the everyday Joes um, to become creators. So do you have this kind of urge? For instance, would you ever create, let's say, a software or something that enables others to produce what you've been able to do yourself? That's interesting for me.
And
just for the artists, let's say, the artists'
it's
names.
kind of interesting because I don't get inspiration from my work from art, even though I'm a person that goes to shows a lot, like both visual arts, concerts, raves, and like
art doesn't inspire you.
It's not really that I get inspired for like directly for my work through something similar, though I think it's precisely the function of the mind, of the brain, to make synthesis.
Okay, let me rephrase it, because this is the trap of the artist talk. Because we are trying to do an artist talk, but actually I'm just from a music lover, because I am myself like addicted to music, probably more than anything else, any other art form. So from a music lover, I would say, which are the, let's say, the individuals, not even artists, that really like inspire you, not for your work but in general, to look at music as a form of art which is complex and which is also reflecting your narrative, not just listening music, not just party rave music, just creators of like complexities of sound.
Last night I had an interesting conversation which I was referring to like a live performance that I saw some years ago, which was the best live performance I've seen. Hold for a second. And then recently I saw a second live of that same person, and it was the second best live performance I've seen. And this is drum sound. This is 103 Point Never. This is OPN, and I'm very fascinated by kind of the development of his practice, but also not only that as a musician he's very interesting to me, but also every time I'm a spectator or like listening of his performance, I really perceive him as a complex artist, like as a visual artist, because I feel he has that approach to his work as well, not only through the mediation or through some kind of staging, but even the way this dynamic is built that I was talking about, some sort of like narrative, is completely broken to pieces, and he creates like a very fascinating dynamic. But I listen to a lot of things, like I listen to a lot of film music. Coming to here, I was actually listening to the soundtrack of a movie that I liked quite a lot recently, which was Challengers. And it's made by the two former members, the soundtrack of 9 Inch Nails. Quite fascinating soundtrack. They actually made a name for themselves the last 15 years with being like one of the most exciting composers for film music. So a lot of film music. Recently a lot of pop, something very new to me. Like, but I'm discovering or exploring. I'm not really stuck with one particular music. A lot of ambient. I mean, I can function on ambient during the week pretty well, but when I'm out cycling or running, which is a big part of my daily life, I listen to a lot of new albums, and yeah, spending a lot of time with sound actually.
I have a dark secret to share. I also love like soundtracks and let's say film music, but my favorite genre is definitely horror movies and sound. I find soundtracks of horror movies. I even download and listen to soundtracks of horror movies that I haven't watched because I find it so it's so deeply psychologically effective. It's like almost music that it can affect me physically, so it can make me cringe or I can feel cold or like even being scared. This is like it's such a nice way of rushing, like pumping up your dopamine and then adrenaline. And actually I listened to a very interesting podcast specifically about composers of horror movie soundtracks, horror film music. So it's really interesting because in the last years there's been a big, let's say, a big lack, or not lack, but there's not any new scary sounds that that we can listen to, because mostly like the noises, the samples that they use, they're like unhuman, or let's say like something that is putting you in a situation when you're like unsettled, like something otherworldly, or like something that sounds like an insect would sound like, or something that is connected to your fear of like I don't know, metal and nails crawling. It's very interesting. And apparently also there is some study behind raves and techno music, and actually how it became a form of really emancipating yourself and making you feel stronger, because initially this rhythm and the sound would like make you feel unsettled, but if you listen to it in a large group with a lot of people together, it becomes like a war march, like powerful. It gives you power. So it's interesting. I was thinking if we create like a rave and we listen to horror film music, how it's gonna react.
Yeah, some people would argue that it's already pretty
Horrific.
horror-like. Horror movies not really something it's exactly my expertise. Though I have a lot of friends now being quite into the genre. But yeah, definitely a lot of like production is going there as well, and I like a bit. There's something slightly like exaggerated about film music, especially about everything Hollywood, and I like that somehow. It's just it gives you this kind of extra taste to it somehow, and you can almost like imagine the story without seeing it. In fact, want to introduce that one?
The witches. Then that's quite horror-like for me, this end. So what is this piece? The last one actually from the library.
There actually was so, as I mentioned, like we created like a set of instructions. There were a few hundreds, which I've read, all of them, but they were quite similar. It's something like trying to find the 10 differences kind of exercise, and I've selected, I believe around 17 or 18, and created like a large, like a bit over 1 hour soundscape for the space. So I don't have a particular way of relating to each and every one of them. Maybe not, at least not until the moment of deciding to release them. Actually, I'm really thinking about that quite a lot. But it's more, but it's really with the meta narrative of what it's initially meant to be, and how this sound wouldn't exist if it's not to somehow fulfill or satisfy certain conceptual needs for the purposes of that visual work. And then I'm thinking, what would happen if we just bring it back to something rather familiar format? Because sometimes we really go too far of trying to invent a new formats, but there's already so many established norms because of which a lot of other things make sense. People will be like, oh, can you imagine people walking in a straight line wearing a certain clothes and then they are moving in that way, and people are like, yeah, it's a catwalk. Oh yeah, it's a catwalk. You know, like sometimes you really putting so much effort in trying to invent a format, but actually changing a context of something already familiar, and calling it, yeah, with something that we recognize could actually create the substance of it somehow.
So like linking the narrator, linking the already existing, let's say the existing concept with the name or.
I mean, on the other side, it's quite an artistic, slightly, in some cases, like questionable practice of, you know, calling something an opera without it being an opera, or calling it a. I mean, I've done that already quite a few times with working with this idea called
Magritte, for instance.
Calling a installation a movie without it being a movie. But it's also really based on the cinematic trope. So I'm thinking, what would happen if you deconstruct the movie on its main elements, build the dynamic, build the storyline, and at the same time having a reference or substantial part of the work that it's referring to film, like with the one I've created last year, in which I work with the legacy of the person who is perceived the first female film director in Bulgaria, Binka Zheleskova, created continuation of her work through machine learning, so it's AI films, as a way to pay tribute to her work, in fact, but also try to speculate of the possibility of using machine learning as a tool to reinforce historical continuity, or kind of thinking like, oh, would she use that tool if she had the chance? And then the next step was actually another pattern within my practice, which is always creating this triangle between our perspective, which we unavoidably cannot escape, so the human perspective, technological one, and then an animal, and in that case was the donkey. So I made a screening of AI films in a donkey farm, and I made the movie of them watching it.
It was quite a cozy donkey farm.
This was a very, you know, it's
very nice.
I mean, the reason it was also not random, like the choice of the donkey as an animal, because it was depicted in one of Binka Zheleskova's movie, and pre the fall of communism, actually, the party recognized the donkey as, or they read an attempt of her ironizing the party, or like whoever was in charge, and that's why the movie was banned. So I wanted to kind of turn that perspective around, and this brought me actually to doing a lot of research on the abilities of donkeys to see or hear, or their kind of sensibility and how they act in certain situations. And in fact, it's all connected to some sort of very often like stereotypical misconceptions we have about other forms of life perception. So there was also this kind of post-anthropocentric perspective of trying to imagine how they would hear or how they would see the donkeys, I mean.
Not the communist leaders. It was very nice experience, the exhibition, and what I really enjoy now with this conversation with you is that a lot of the things that I've seen from you or like experienced in your shows, I was not able maybe to make it to most openings, but I think like hearing you speak now, it gives a lot of new context, or let's say new layers to read the artworks, and not only the artworks but also to read you as a person, as a human being, as an animal, as a donkey, as a creature. And I mean, it's really, that's like probably one of the things that I love about your art, or generally like installation art or more complex forms of art. It's that it cannot be interpreted like one-sidedly. It's always like adding new perspectives. You can come back and look at it or experience it. And this brings me now to the last point, as also our soundtrack kind of finished. We have 20 minutes left probably, but I'm really interested to to know more about how you see now your future, let's say, works, because now as a whole I see the progression of you adding elements and developing to more like this kind of like full products, I would say, like package of like audio, visual, and contextual, and research, and then technological, but also kind of semiotical and human, but also non-human side. And it's a never expanding process, but I'm imagining at one point, for instance, now you're going to do an installation in Veliko Trnovo, let's put it out there, right, in the vitrine, curated by Martina Jordanova, the 1 square meter.
1 square meter art, yeah, it's actually a project by Martina, but in this case it's curated by Galina Dimova, who is one of the founders of the lab. And the lab is, I'm just thinking for 3 seconds before saying it, but I think it's the only foundation organization in Bulgaria that is in some way interested in anything digital.
Well, I would not be so brave.
In fact, it is. It's a little bit of a gap. I feel there's not a lot of theoreticians nor that many curators that are interested in something that is quite
There's
not pervasive, but so widespread and such an integral part of our life.
Maybe education is also a missing link.
In fact, things are all connected. But I was invited to, in fact, present the work I'm showing at the RCTA currently there as well. And they're just lucky. I'm lucky that this particular work allows that. So I'm showing one of the largest, like most self-referential instruction as a way to speak about that, because in fact we have 1 square meter of space, and we would use the chance to make yet another talk and talk to the audience and engage with people who are interested in hearing a bit more.
I'm not sure you're actually speaking to the microphone now. Or maybe what I can check. I'm not sure. But maybe you should. Okay, I don't hear it from this side. Because it's really interesting to say this. It's a really nice conversation starter, I would say this, like the 1 square meter gallery, also like with similar things like Posta here in Sofia and other such like small formats, which are just like very good for also like showing something outside in the.
Yeah, I would say I find it actually quite challenging, this idea of the one piece, with a few very little exceptions in the last, as I say, nearly 10 years. I don't know why it's this kind of symbolic anniversary means something to me, but I've created approximately 33 or 34 installations, and there's this phrase people say, you can't make anything but your own work. And the way I read that is that you don't really choose how exactly to approach your practice. Like, it's not really a decision, but it's rather like the way your mind works, mixed with your interest, of course. I don't choose to every time create work I've never done before, but I have this need to learn something new. And so people ask me, what do you do? And I usually answer with, I don't know. I just do it for that and that much time. But so that's why I was saying that it's rather challenging, because I don't ever create a singular piece. For me, it's more exciting to think, what is the world in which these works are part of? Like, where do they exist? Is it now? Is it in the future? Is it for humans, or is it for animals to perceive? And once I establish that protocol, it's actually then the story or the kind of the methodology unfolds, and it's this kind of relational process where everything kind of exists in connection to one another.
When you said like, is it for humans or for animals, I just had this like vision of gathering a bunch of farm animals to speculate or just join the opening of an exhibition. Actually, I think there's probably being done.
That was pretty much the kind of anecdote or the approach with the donkeys from last year. And it's one of the because this complexity also has a little bit the risk to remain kind of difficult to unfold, and or maybe slightly more exclusive for people that feel that like, they can't approach it necessarily. But with that particular work, with making the film in the donkey farm, showing them the AI films, everyone kind of understood, or it provokes a certain kind of humorous reaction. And I think this comes, precisely from this tension of how do we understand them as animals and what's their kind of frame of perception, the way we understand it. But yeah, it is possible, and I think it would say something about the reality we're experiencing.
I was curious earlier on. You said like there was a phase. Obviously, I think all of us went through this when we were facing the beginning of this like it seems to be never-ending era of like wars and self-destruction coming from humanity. And I really could reflect in your words that like wondering whether anything you do really does matter. And actually, I'm still having these thoughts on a daily, more maybe less than a daily now, but on a regular basis. So I'm always confronted with this question, and I'm wondering what you would answer, maybe as the last, let's say, more open even. Maybe we don't know the answer, but how do you feel like nowadays in the specific time and context we live in? How do you feel like an artist should justify his art and being an artist? I mean, because obviously it's a very common perception, it's a very common question that comes mostly from people that are non-related to art world, because there are such people. So in their a bit like with the donkeys, I wonder what they would say. And like would the donkey say like, what is this? Why is this happening now? Why are we making it, or even having this conversation? What is the justification of that? And do you think that the world is pushing you forward towards like something more, like being more socially aware, or let's say more socially responsible in your artwork? That being said, what is it to be socially, engaged? I don't know if I made
That's a great last question, though I don't want to really finish on a negative note.
It's not negative. Could be. It depends on you. On your answer.
Yeah, just two things to say. Actually, last year again, the it was called Deep Daydream-Reality, the opening scene, the show. I had to find someone to write about it, and I invited Natalia Jordanova. We already mentioned her in this conversation, and she was kind of taking her time, and I was like, Martina, I need to kind of, work. We have to do this interview. And after some time, she was like, I got it, I have an idea. And she decided to do the interview with the donkeys to sort of then continue my thought of the idea of the post-anthropocentrism. So she was asking the donkeys, and I was responding as if from their perspective. I found it first very stimulating, her proposal, and then I didn't know if it's gonna work. So
I need you to explain more how she was asking the donkeys, and
so she would ask them things related to their experience of being filmed or how they perceived, and I was basically LARPing the donkeys. So I would really, based on the knowledge I already accumulated of how they perceive and how they see, and there's a lot of kind of misconceptions that we have, because this kind of trope of, say, the donkey being the lazy animal, but it's actually not quite like that. It's really based on like fear, and then the kind of how they freeze, how they become immobile and stuff like that. But actually it turned out quite good, and in a way, I mean, it's a bit quirky, clearly, like you have to change perspective in order to read the interview. But that was a bit of a detour from your actual question, and as I said, if I really tell you what I think, it will be rather maybe not that optimistic. I just want to say that regardless of the medium or the particular realm a certain artist has chosen or had the opportunity to partake, because there's a big variation there, I think we do need to understand what could be the implications of what we're saying, and even if it's not necessarily the subject of our work, what is very common about what we do is that everything we do is, to the moment it reaches the audience, is public. So it's quite a privileged position, but it also comes with a certain level of responsibility and a certain way to and possibility to say something. And so I think it's a good just kind of proposition I'll just throw in the mic to the people that are listening to us, to just be aware of all these moments that we have the freedom and the opportunity to carry out a message and to be politically explicit, because it is quite important.
So that's a good non-answer, but I take it. And I'm really happy that we made this first talk in a series of talks. I see a possible victim right there. A lot of questions for fashion, my friend. and so I'm really happy to share this with everybody who might be interested, and also to have an opportunity, as we decided to make this in English, obviously, not only because we all speak this language, because of the fact of traveling and learning abroad, and also being the universal kind of instrument for communication, but for me it's also giving a better perspective to what's happening here. I'm not saying like even locally, but just like what's happening right now, right here. And I like to take a shift from just like focusing on just merely consuming art or consuming music, and to put a little bit of time, an hour or two a month, for talking, because it's really helping me also. It's like a therapy for me. Let's say, put it that way. And I hope you enjoyed it as well.
Thank you, Dssy, for having me, and it was great to share some little stories around the work, and it was great to be your guest. Thanks.
And please do provide us with links, at least the ones that you have on SoundCloud, and maybe upload some more of the tunes that we were listening to. And I'm sure the audience would like to also have access to the music.
Sure, we do that with pleasure.
Thank you, and see you next time, whenever that is.
Bye.
Hey.